have you ever heard of people like journeying, you know?
Yeah,
And
going on trips.
yeah, and they go into this crazy experience and then they get through it and whatever happens happens and then they come out of it, right? Well,
Mm.
the way I kind of think of Dad is he went into that and never came out of it. I'm not saying he did any drugs or any of this stuff. I don't believe he did. But I think through his process of becoming the prophet and everything, he became so entrenched in his vision and so loyal to it and believed so much in it himself that this was kind of the place his mind was at all through this time, and this is one of the reasons it was so intense when he was right there.
Hey everyone, welcome back. My name is Sam.
And I'm Melissa.
I was raised in a family with 4 moms and 35 kids. We were members of the FLDS Church, which is a polygamous group run by their prophet Jaden Jeffs, who is now serving a life sentence in prison.
I was raised mainstream LDS in Utah. Sam and I have been married for 10 years. 5 years into our marriage, we stepped away from religion completely, and we have 2 awesome kiddos.
Yes, we do. We want to quickly thank our donors, YouTube members, and patrons on Patreon, as well as all of our wonderful subscribers. Thank you all so much for your support.
Yes, and we also want to let everybody know that coming up in just a few short weeks on March 14th is the Holding Out Help annual fundraiser. We are lucky enough and honored to be able to be the MC for that event. We will leave a link down below if anyone would like to come. It's going to be in Draper, Utah, again, March 14th that evening. We will be there. Please come support this awesome cause. Come say hi to us. We'll be there before and staying a little while after. So we would love to see anybody there that can come and support Holding Out Help.
Yes, thank you all so much for the support that you have given this organization in the past and what you will be giving them in the future, because they have helped so many people that are leaving difficult situations. So it's a wonderful cause, and we're looking forward to seeing anyone that can make it.
Yes. Today we are so excited to have a special guest that I have been so excited. Like all day, I've been like, oh, I want to ask this question. I have so many questions. I hope he's ready for it. We have Jaden Jeffs with us today. So thanks for being here, Jaden.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
And we are super excited to have you here with us because you know so much, being the son of Jaden Jeffs, that can help us clarify some of the questions we have had and a lot of our viewers have had. So we do want to start out with how we typically start out our interviews, and that is where you were raised, how many moms you have, and how many siblings you have.
Yeah. Well, I was born in Sandy, Utah, and oddly enough, I'm back here today. But I grew up when I was 1 to 4, I was in Short Creek or Colorado City, where you were raised. And then we went to Colorado for a few months. And then I was in Texas from when I was 5 to 12 or something like that. And then
Wow.
from there, Colorado for a while, South Dakota for a while, and then just kind of moving back and forth between those states. Yeah, I have had 80 moms, which was, totally normal.
Perfectly natural, right?
54 biological siblings, and then Dad had 4 children. We call it, I don't know what you call them, but, adopted or aftermarket or
Okay.
however you want to call it. But, to us, they were there for, they were totally our siblings. They've been there, since I was about 5. So
Wow. Okay.
Wow.
So logistically, with having 80 moms or Jaden Jeffs having 80 wives, how many of those moms did you interact with on a regular basis? Did you view them all as moms?
I don't know if I viewed them all as moms. I definitely didn't view them all as mother. You know, every one of Dad's children will tell you, like, this was mother. My mother was,
Mm.
there's only one mother, right? And they only considered one of the mothers their own mother. And that's how it always was for me. But yeah, we considered all of them, I guess we called all of them mother, mother so and so. So for me, I would call mother. That's all I would call her. But
Right.
any of the other mothers, it would be like Mother Amy or, Mother whoever.
Did you know all of them? Like, did you interact with them?
Yeah, for sure. I knew pretty much all of them. There was some that were pretty irrelevant, it's kind of interesting because when you have that many women in one home, then there's certain ones that are there's definitely a hierarchy of women.
Mm.
Mm.
You know, it's not like all of them are equal or so from what I remember when I was 5 years old, walking past the kitchen and seeing a certain mother in there making food. And then when I was 6, and then when I was 7, 8, same exact person. And I remember this
Okay.
mother,
Okay.
even when I was got to be 13 and 14 years old, she was just still in there making food. And I remember thinking, God, I am so glad I am not her,
That's a lot of kitchen duty time.
It's a lot of people to feed.
Yeah. I just thought of her, more like a concubine. And I know that's it seems kind of mean to say, but it's also, I think it's also true. In dad's wives, I would just split them up to where, you had the top ones that were really close to him that did a lot of things, for him and with him. And then you have the ones with children. And those ones with children, a lot of times did do things with him, but they were more focused on their children than they were anything else. And then you have this group after that that kind of helps those mothers with their children. And then after that, you
Mm.
have the what I would consider the bottom group that doesn't even really help with the children. They're more just like I was saying, doing kitchen stuff or sewing for the storehouse or I don't know, exactly why they were right at the bottom, but
Did it go in order of like, okay, the first wife was in the top tier, and could they ever switch tiers? Like, was there a way to earn favor and get like promoted in the tiers? I don't know a better way to say that. I'm sorry.
yeah, the tears weren't like obvious. Dad often said he didn't have favorites, right? But so the
Mm.
tears weren't an obvious. Well, I mean, they were obvious to me, and I think to everybody, but they weren't like a rule actually or anything. So
Mm.
I see.
no, it definitely wasn't in order of marriage or anything. It was if dad liked you, then some people came into the family and immediately they were basically at the top, and others came into the family and immediately they were basically at the bottom. So
Wow.
it was this interesting dynamic. Of course, I never knew any different. I thought every family was maybe not totally this way. I mean, I knew even among the FLDS, I knew that we had a bigger family than a lot of the other people, a lot of the other men, but monogamy just, I didn't even know that really was a thing. I mean, I knew people started out with one, but
Right.
That was just the starter wife.
Right. So
yeah.
everybody has to start somewhere, right?
Uh-huh.
So where did your mother fall in as far as
Uh,
which wife and in that hierarchy?
yeah, she was the fifth wife. I can't even remember exactly what year she got married, but she had her first child in 1996. So I want to say
Mm.
she was married 2 years before that. Um, she really fell in love with dad, and she has told me a lot of stories about it. I don't want to speak for her too much, but
Mm.
she really did fall in love with dad, and she talks about it a lot, and I think it really hurts her a lot. Everything that's happened, and it's been hard for me to watch too. If there's one argument I
Right.
have against polygamy, it's my mother. Just watching her and what she's
Mm.
been through. If I look at it through the point of my mother, then I don't like polygamy. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Right.
Because it has been a tough t- 10 or 15 years or more, you know.
Wow. So
Mm.
growing up with have did you ever have all 80 mothers? Like, were you all ever in one house at the same time? Because that seems just like a lot of people.
Yeah, down there in Texas, there was a time where I think we had pretty much everybody there. I think everybody was
Wow.
supposed to be there. Some people were gone on a trip or this and that, but it was never for very long. I think it was for a couple months or something. It was after the 2008 raid. All our family was down there in Texas. And yeah, everybody was in one house. Not very often, though, for sure.
I see.
Okay.
So, how old were you when your father, Warren Jeffs, became the prophet of the FLDS Church?
Uh, I was 4 or 5. I can't even remember. I think I was 4.
Okay, so you were still very young. Did you were you old enough to kind of remember that, and what were your feelings, if you can recall?
I hardly remember the when Dad wasn't the prophet. So he,
Okay.
Mhm,
to me, he was almost always. I do remember it. I do remember grandfather dying, and you know, then the mother saying, "Hey, father's the prophet now," and it got way more special to be around him and whatnot. But yeah, that's pretty much
mhm.
always how I remember it, and I never really saw it any different. Even before, I think I saw him as a special person. After I saw him as a special person, it's always was the prophet to me.
Yeah, yeah.
As a young child, what were you told were, like, your expectations being the son of the prophet? Did you feel like you had different expectations on you as a child than other children in Short Creek?
Yeah, I mean, I felt the responsibility to set a good example to some degree. I think this was different for Dad's younger children though, because everybody we were around was pretty just. I mean, I remember mostly down there in Texas. Everybody we were around was kind of in the hierarchy of the community, and I didn't really
Mhm.
know that at the time. And so to me, life was pretty normal. I thought I didn't feel like I was some special person. I know a lot of people even looking back on it, a lot of people that were right around Dad's family, they look in and they think, oh, you guys were always treated so special, and you were the prophet's kids and whatnot. But I never remember feeling that way until I got to be 11 or 12. And then I might have felt more like, you know, at least I understood the difference better at that point. When I was five,
Mhm.
6, 7, I just, that wasn't that big of a deal to me. The
Mhm.
people that I had in my class, my classmates, and the other people I dealt with, I didn't feel like I was special getting to go back up to my house any more than they were going to their house, when I was
I see.
younger at all. And I
Yeah.
wanted to go spend time with them as friends, uh, and they wanted to spend time with me, and we were friends. And I didn't think I was the any special kid or anything like that. So
Yeah, it's so interesting you say that. I mean, perspective, right? Just the simple fact, coming from my experience growing up in the FLDS church, I would look at that and say, just the simple fact that you were in Texas on the ranch would set you way above anything that I ever reached, because I was never quote unquote righteous enough to ever go to this compound or this place of Zion that they were building up. And then to hear that you had your own friend group and your own little life growing up in Texas, feeling like it was just normal life, that's very interesting to hear.
Yeah, because kids only know what they're used to, right?
Right.
Everybody, when you're 5, 6, 7 years old, your entire reality is only what you know. It's only your own little bubble.
yeah, we should put it into perspective because if you were my mother looking at it at that time, she probably did see me as this special kid, or my dad or whoever. They probably did see me as this special kid that was, on the redemption of Zion, helping dad. And, I just didn't see it that way. I didn't feel it. So
Yeah. What was your
Yeah.
relationship like with your father as a young child? Did you get to see him much?
when I was when we were in Short Creek before we moved, I feel that I saw him fairly often. And, my mom was, pretty good at getting some pictures of us together, or, trying to get dad to spend a little bit of time. But from the time I was 3, I wasn't really with mother a whole lot. From then on, pretty much one of the other mothers is over you, and mother was gonna have another kid. But From the time you're 3, I feel like if you're in Warren Jeff's family, you're kind of going to be with a different mother, and you're going to spend
Mm.
maybe a little bit of time with your mother every day if you can. Yeah, my relationship with dad at that age, um, I remember him here and there. Down in Texas, I remember a lot more than I do early on. But yeah, we didn't see him a ton. We talked to him on the phone once in a while. I definitely didn't know him like the older children did, and to me, he was probably more special than he was to them.
So, as far as your mother, then, was she always around, or were you? You mentioned that some of the other wives would watch over the children, and we had Ada Marie on our channel before, and she talked about how she would watch over the children quite often. Was her duty as a wife was to
Mhm.
watch over the children, and so I'm sure you saw her around a lot. But what about your mother? Were you ever separated from her?
Yeah. So Ada Marie was kind of over us until I turned 6 or 7. Uh, as long as we were there in the creek, she was kind of the one that was over us. So yeah, it was different mothers, but it was generally fairly consistent. Where Dad would assign a mother and say, "Okay, she's over you two or you three boys for the foreseeable future," and then you know a year might go by, and then he would say, "Okay, this other mom, she's over you boys now." And certainly there was favorites, of who we wanted our caretaker to be. That's what Dad called them, as caretakers. You know,
Okay.
Mhm.
people in the creek that lived in the creek later on. They're really familiar with this caretaker word, because they had
Yeah.
caretakers assigned to them, but that was different. There were men that were like caretakers assigned over families, right? But
Right.
this is a word dad used all the time in his family. So he would call him your caretaker. And so yeah, he would assign different caretakers. He would come home and just get a hair and change everything. This caretaker is going to be over these people. This mother's going to be these people's caretakers now. These two children aren't doing very well together, so I'm going to split them up and have different caretakers over them. So that's kind of how it was as far as caretakers go.
So, with all of these caretakers, were you completely separated from your mother, or was she around?
Oh, she was around. She taught school, and then it seems like once one of Dad's wives started having children, it seems like they would have children more often. It
Mm.
was usually not just one child. So, for example, mother, she had children about every 2 years. So she would have a child, and then after, it seems like after 3 year, that child turned 3 years old, then it's not that they didn't see her. Usually we'd spend a half hour every day with our mother. Our caretaker would take us and say, "Okay, it's time to spend time with your mother." We would go walking through the house, walk into her bedroom, walk into the kitchen, just trying to find her, and then find her. And the two mothers would talk. Every time, this is how it was. The two mothers would talk, and they would talk about how you were doing and if you were being obedient. And so they would talk, and after about 3 or 4 minutes, then the caretaker with the other two boys or whatever would walk off to keep folding their laundry or whatever they were doing, and then you were with your
Mhm.
mother for a half hour or an hour. And as soon as your mother got busy or had to go do something, she would walk around and look for the caretaker. Usually they were pretty good at communicating. And later on we had phones, but when I was younger, we didn't have phones. So, or the caretakers didn't have phones to call each other, right?
Mhm.
So then your mother would
Mhm.
take you back, and, you know, they would talk for a few minutes and decide uh, when you were going to go be with your mom the next day. And then you were back with your caretaker for the night. And a lot of times mother would stop by at night. Um, a lot of times after I was asleep, or if she could before, and just say goodnight. And I think that was fairly common with all the mothers. They would try to stop by, and they'd try to spend an hour or something with their children every day. And Dad did encourage that when I was younger.
Hmm.
About how many mothers ended up having children? Because you said, with 54 siblings, but 80 mothers. Obviously, all of the wives weren't having children. Do you know how
Yeah.
many did?
It's funny because as children, we just looked at the mothers with children. We looked at them as better, more special. I guess this is part of the hierarchy, I guess, but we looked at them as better people, more special. I think 17 or 19 had kids. I think it's 19.
So was it ever explained to you why 80 wives then? If the intention was only ever to have children with, I say only 17, but compared to the full number of 80, what was it ever shared with you why it was necessary for him to have so many wives?
Well, I think at this point we're kind of getting into Dad's head and sort of what he
Okay.
was thinking. It was never told directly to me, but I think it was pretty well understood among the wives that you needed to be worthy to have a child, right? You needed to
Mm,
be like this saint and qualify. If Dad felt that one of his wives wasn't, you know, living how he taught, or and I think he really believed this. In my opinion, he really believed this. He really judged his wives, and felt like some of them just were not living how he had taught them, and there was just no chance they were going to have a kid. I think a lot
mm.
of those women, they got married. I can't totally speak for them, right? But I'm pretty sure there was at least several of them that never even went into his bedroom. So
In
Interesting.
your opinion, as a child and watching that unfold, do you feel like some of the wives, even though they were married, were just there to work in the kitchen or to
Mhm.
help with the chores?
um, yeah, for sure. Like, I don't know that I should say names on here, but when I start talking about Dad's wives and I'm with my brothers and whatnot, and we start talking about them, then yeah, we really like to go at it. But because the truth is, a lot of these women were really starved for attention. And so
Mm,
one of the things this really got bad as I got older, but one of the things they would do is really find one of the children that was doing something wrong that they could really nail him for, kind of. And they would go to whoever was over the family at the time and just really make a big deal about it. And
mm,
in my view, this was just a total lack of attention type of a thing.
Mhm.
That's my opinion about it. Some of them, because some of these mothers we just viewed as children, we viewed them as always the one that just wanted to make a problem every day.
Mm.
And
mm.
we were supposed to respect them. And Dad would say, you're supposed to obey every mother. And, there's one over you. He kind of put one mother over you, but you're supposed to obey all of them.
I can't
That's a lot of
imagine.
eyes on you.
I was that's
It
exactly
is.
what I
So,
cannot imagine that. I mean, for me, growing up in a home with four moms, getting away with anything was very difficult. There were always like you get up from the dinner table and you think you're just going to casually walk outside and go play and try to sneak around anyone seeing you that grabs you and says, "No, you got to help with dishes." And getting away from four moms' eyes was impossible. 80? How did
It's a lot of eyes.
you couldn't get away with
yeah,
anything.
yeah, we did not get away with anything. And I remember particular mothers when I was 6 or 7. I would be, supposed to be winding up a hose by the side of the house, and I would get done, and I would see a different mother than say was over me coming around the corner, but they hadn't seen me yet, and I would dash and go around the corner and then just start walking normal. I just didn't even want to come in contact with them. I knew they were going to make a problem, and you just wanted nothing to
Oh.
do. So you were saying that you had four moms and we had
Mhm.
80, and this is totally how it was. I think one of the unique things about Dad's family is there was quite a few less children than there was moms. Every other family I know, there was almost always more children than there was mothers.
Yeah. So, and kind of going to what you were saying before about these wives that were feeling that they weren't, I mean, and how could he spread his attention evenly over 80 wives, right? That's just impossible. I don't care if you're Superman. So these wives that are feeling like they're not getting the attention, do you think that they were just like, I guess, an employee at in a job? If they feel like they find a problem and they present this problem to the owner, then they're going to somehow get that attention and be able to say,
Brownie
hey,
points.
yeah, brownie points, look what I did, I found this problem. Is that what the wives were doing to compete for his attention?
uh, well, not the smarter ones, because dad read through that pretty good. You know, I,
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
the way I see this personally now is if you had a more seductive personality or you had some sort of connection with dad. So dad's earlier wives were always, some of them were treated pretty bad, but like mother, she was treated better. I feel like, at least in the beginning. Later on it changed, but because I think dad had really fallen in love with her to some degree, and she was the fifth wife, so she had more of that opportunity. If you
Mm,
were the 17th or 18th or 30th wife, you didn't really, I don't think, had an opportunity to fall in love with dad unless you were just had a really seductive personality. And, that's my
mhm.
opinion. As far as them being employees, well, probably worse because, they didn't get a paycheck. But um, yeah, totally. I just view them as I view it as concubines. And one thing I think about these kind of situations is if you're being tyrannized by someone and you can't see a way or or find a way to get out of it, or just simply can't see it, then slowly you kind of become a tyrant yourself. I
Mm.
Mm,
From my experience, this is just so true. And I would say the mothers with children just had so much more of a purpose. I think that's why we ended up, and there was definitely ones that were very good. I'm not saying any of them were bad. I'm not here to say any of them were bad, but I truly believe that once you're tyrannized for long enough and you're just in that situation, you sort of become the tyrant.
Yeah.
mm,
Well, and the women in the FLDS are taught that their whole purpose in life is to become a wife and a mother, but mother is supposed to be the highest calling, like you said, where your father is saying that you have to be worthy to even be allowed to be one. And I know when we had talked to Amy or Ada Marie before, that being withheld also was
yeah.
like a cruel punishment to these women, where it wasn't just, oh, you're not like their worthiness was so tied to it, the constantly being belittled and having to do all the menial tasks in a family and not be allowed and say, I'm not worthy to be able to have children. But yet they're in a religion that's taught that that's the most important thing, to think that you're not going to achieve what you were sent to this earth for. I can't imagine how that would break your spirit so quickly.
Yeah.
And it would be easy
Yeah.
to become a tyrant, I would guess.
Yeah, and I'm not suggesting that these women were just super mean and beating on us
Yeah.
or anything. There was a few circumstances that may have happened, but they were just sad. I don't know.
Yeah.
Their soul was sad, I think, and
Yeah.
there was definitely this dynamic I'll talk about a little bit among the mothers, that where, especially after dad went to prison, I feel like I noticed this more. It was probably there before, I just wasn't old enough to notice. But when the children were around, it was father, and it was, father wants you to do this and father wants you to do that. But as I started getting older, I started noticing more and more, you know certain mothers would kind of get into these, I call them cliques, and they would just really all be connected.
Mm,
And I'm not suggesting in a bad way or anything, but just they're always together. And anyway, they're always like, we're on, and they don't say
mm,
this really around the children, but they're, when they're by themselves, you just hear it a lot. And when they're talking in testimony meeting or whatever, it's always some sweet story about Warren. I saw this constantly as long as one of the children wasn't right there.
Yeah,
Interesting.
I can't imagine how difficult that would be as one of these 80 wives, especially the ones that weren't getting the attention, to try to find a way to, I don't know,
Form connections.
form connections and just feel like they had some purpose in life that was being taken from them, because that's one way that a woman can feel close to her husband, is to have a child with her husband. And especially these women that are feeling so special because they married the prophet of God in their
Yeah.
minds, right? So they're these very special women in our eyes, other members of the community, because they married the prophet of God. And now we're hearing more and more that going into it, they probably felt very special, but then it didn't take long to realize, oh, I'm just a glorified babysitter, or I'm just in the kitchen every day, all day. I'm not getting any of these things that they probably dreamt of as young girls growing up that would be marriage, even though it was very different than the traditional type of marriage. So I can
Yeah.
imagine that would just be so hard.
I I have this weird feeling about everything, about all of them, where some of them I look back and I feel really bad for them, and others I look back and I just can't feel bad. I don't know why. It's not. I think it's just because I was there with them for so many years, and I
Hmm.
genuinely knew a good 50 of Dad's wives pretty good. To where
Yeah.
even if we saw each other today, we could just immediately start having a conversation about everything that happened. So there was probably 30 of
Wow.
them that I didn't really, hardly ever even talk to. There was just so many, right? Um, but
Hmm.
Yeah.
it's this weird dynamic, and some of them, yeah, I just, as someone that was there the whole time, I just can't even feel, I can't even feel very bad. But I think that's just because I need to zoom out and see them before they were there. I if I could see them before they were married to Dad, and see him as this girl that was just a part of this family, and that's just not how I saw them. I always saw them as mothers. I always saw them as my
Hmm.
bosses. I saw every
Yeah.
mom as my boss besides my own mother. That's how I saw all of them. They're just bosses, and if there's a way that we can avoid one of them, then we will.
Well, the last question I have to ask before we get off this topic of mothers in general was, at what age were you old enough to start seeing your father marrying underage or young women?
Yeah, I was 8 when Dad married his youngest wife. I remember this. Um, I was 8 years old, and actually, Dad baptized me just right around the same time. I remember going. He called me up into his office with my then caretaker, um, and sat me down and questioned me down, and I answered all his questions, and he said, "You're ready to be baptized." And so we got baptized at that time. And I remember I really wanted to be baptized by Dad. I was 8 years old, and I just thought that would be special. So Dad did baptize me, and then he baptized like 20 other kids at that time. I remember watching, like 10 go in before me, and then I went in. Dad's in these white clothes down in the meeting house in Texas, and where there's a baptismal font. And as they came out, his first two counselors, Wendell and Merrill, were laying hands on their heads and giving them the Holy Ghost. But
Hmm.
Yeah.
yeah, as far as Dad's wives, I just didn't. For one, I did not even have any clue about any sexual uh,
Mm.
Hmm.
facts, basically. So
Yeah.
to me, it was just literally another boss. I mean, other than they were so young that I didn't really have so much to do with them right off. I saw them once in a while. Um, there was five or more, but the one I remember the most was mother's sister, and I did see her occasionally. She, uh, just in passing here and there. She wasn't really ever put over me. She was put over some of the younger children, and she kind of tended them for her job, I guess. But um, I didn't even have a single second thought about how old. To me,
Wow.
I was 8 and she was still you know probably 2 feet taller than me, or I can't remember for sure, but
Yeah. Do
So
you know
she,
how
yeah.
old she was?
yeah, she was 12.
Wow.
So I was 8, she was 12, and my oldest brother's 10 years older than me, so he was.
18?
Yeah, I was 8, he was 18, and she was 12.
Was that your mother's younger sister that was the youngest one, or just one of the other? Because you said there were multiple girls that were very young.
I think some were 14 and some were 15. Yeah, I think, like the one you see in Keep Sweet, the one you see Dad holding, that's my mother's sister.
Oh,
I don't want to speak for any of these mothers, but
Yeah.
no, I didn't think anything of it, and I didn't think I've in the past couple years I've had pretty extensive conversations with different ones of Dad's wives about that whole dynamic, and just wondering what was going on and what was kind of going through their minds. And it was such an
yeah.
intense time, and Dad had 100% control. I think you can't really blame. You could say, like, mother, it was her sister, but you can't really look at it that way, because the minute mother said anything, uh, yeah, she was gonna have the hell of a life.
Right. No, no one could speak up against him.
Right? But also, I don't think any of these mothers that were close to Dad even had the thought of saying anything, because they were so involved in all this redeeming Zion stuff that, I mean, they were so fervent and prayerful and
Mhm.
devoted that they probably didn't even have a second thought to say anything, to be honest. I really believe
Right.
that about most of them. I didn't really understand how young 12 was to get married until, way later, when I was sort of in the process of leaving, and my youngest sister was 12 years old, and I still didn't really know. I hadn't really got on the internet or anything like that yet. But after a while, I got on the internet, and that's when I just started learning everything about everything. And um, but I would do quotes. I would do quotes for different people, just different Gentile. I mean, we call them Gentiles, whatever you want to call them. Normal people. So I was giving quotes to these people, for little construction projects, and I would see their children, and I would just ask them, how old is your child? And this is when I was starting to use the internet and do all the things I probably shouldn't, that I felt like I shouldn't do at the time, but of course I should have just done them way sooner. But I'd ask them, how old's your child? And they would say 12. And I would be like, oh my God. you know, I had no,
Yeah.
I had no comprehension of, just how young a 12-year-old child is. And I think a lot of people in the FLDS are the same way. A little while ago, um, we were having a conversation. My mother was having a conversation with someone else in the FLDS, and they have a 12-year-old daughter. And anyway, mother was kind of having this argument with them about it, and about how young Dad was taking wives, and
Hmm.
they
Mm.
were just could not believe she was questioning. And she said, look, the girl was 12 years old. Mother was telling him this. The girl was 12 years old, and this person has a 12-year-old daughter. And they,
Hmm.
it just made them so upset to even think about it. So it kind of is about
Yeah.
putting it in perspective for people. especially for someone like me that, she was my mother. She was, uh, I mean, I thought of her as my mother, basically. She was 4 years older. I think she wasn't my mother.
Wow.
Yeah, but like you said, putting things into perspective, I had a sister that was 15-ish when she was married, and she was a second wife to someone that was, I believe, in his 40s. And I didn't really think much of it because, what, like you said, I was much younger than my sister. So in my eyes, this was my big grown-up sister that's getting married. Wow, good for you. And then you get older and you
And you
look
have
back, and
kids.
especially when you have your own kids, and you think, holy smokes, I would have gone to war. I would have gone to war if someone tried to take my daughter at that age. But these parents, these fathers and mothers within the FLDS church believed that your father was doing what God wanted him to do. And so it wasn't just a man making decisions, it was God making decisions. And this kind of leads into the next question I have for you, because we would look at your father, Warren Jeffs, as the prophet, as this perfect man that would do no wrong, because even the way he would speak to us over the pulpit was in a way that it seemed, and we were told, that he was receiving direct revelation from God in the moment that he spoke, that his words were literally God's words. He was the mouthpiece for God. So we looked at him as this person that did no wrong. And I wanted to ask you, as someone that grew up in the house with him and that you would see him around, did you look at your father as we did, or did you look at him as a man that could do things, like he had flaws, that he wasn't a perfect person?
Yeah. One more thing on that 12-year-old situation. Um,
Yeah.
my mother, um, and I think maybe some other women asked dad at some point, before he was put in prison, somewhere in there when they had some time with him. I know mother did this because she told me about it, but she asked dad, can my daughters not get married till they're 18? And dad told her, yeah, I won't marry your daughters till they're 18. So,
Oh.
um, but I don't think he took it. Uh, I think he didn't love it. He wanted her to be more, you know, let him choose, but he said yes, I think. And so I think if people did ask about something, then perhaps they had it, you could ask. But
Hmm.
one thing I would say about that girl, so um, her grandfather or her father is my grandfather, right? And he performed the marriage uh, to my dad, right? And so
Whoa.
he's
Wow.
yeah, so he spent 8 or something years in prison for this when he was pretty old, right? And yeah, he performed this marriage, and I've been thinking about this lately because he was a really looked up, looked to person in the community of the FLDS. I mean, even when he passed away a couple like 2 years ago, then the FLDS had their biggest gathering they've had in years. Something like 5,000 people, 5 to 6,000 people came and sat in for his funeral. So he was a
Wow.
Wow.
really looked to person in the community, and he has a lot of children, right? So
Hmm.
I was just thinking about this, and I asked quite a few different people questions about it, and they said that they felt like he didn't think that dad was going to have any sexual relations when it happened. I'm not justifying
Mm.
any of any of the things these guys did, but I was, you know, he was the bishop down there in Texas, right? And I really wonder what would have happened if he had told dad, like, no, she's too young. I genuinely think that he probably could have said something like, I think she's too young. We should probably wait. Now, of course, ultimately, this is dad's fault. This is dad's fault, but there was so many people that could have probably said something. Just like my mom asked dad if her daughters could wait till they were 18, and he told her yes. I just think somebody probably could have said something. I don't know if I don't know if their life would have been ruined. Maybe it would have, but
Well, and it's good though to have that perspective of like that it might not have been as much of a dictatorship. Everyone might have feared him and feared that something could have happened and it could have, but that there also was a chance that it might not have and that they could have just asked him. And maybe the fear that everybody felt in their hearts for him didn't need to stop them as much as what it did, right? That there's more to just that one side.
yeah, I should add a little bit more perspective because there was girls that married dad that were really young that literally just got taken from their parents. In other words,
Mm.
dad made some phone calls. They weren't down. They weren't the bishop there, like like Merrill was. So they literally just got called to Zion, basically, and married right to dad. So their parents didn't really have a say. They didn't even know anything. They didn't even know anything had happened. So with those parents, they just didn't know. But in this situation, I really don't know what would have happened. It's possible. It's very possible that Merrill Jessup did that and suffered some serious repercussions. He was he was a serious pillar in the community down there, and after
Right.
dad went to prison, sort of ran everything to some degree. And uh, I've been having a hard time making my mind up about it because I really admired him all my whole life, and he was one of the best people I thought I knew at the time. you know,
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, rightfully so. I remember him too, and yeah, he was definitely someone that we all
yeah.
looked up to in the community and that we respected highly. He was one of the leaders. He was one of the spokesperson people. He had a prominent last name. He had a high family.
Yeah.
He had a lot going for him that made us members look up to him a lot. And yeah, I'm with you. I wonder if he did try to say no, because how could we know if he did or not? But the only reason that I would question that is because he continued to remain in this role until he passed away, and I imagine Warren may have kicked him out or something if he said no to him.
Well, actually, he did get kicked out.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, I didn't know that.
He ended up, so before he went to prison, a year before he went to prison, he did get kicked out, and basically, you know, yeah, he got kicked out. So it didn't I
Oh,
wouldn't change it. I wouldn't say it changed people's opinion of him totally. And as the years went on, especially after he went to prison and then got out again, he was sort of invited back, not only by dad, but certainly by the community. But he did continue for several years there. But yeah, he was. So one of the stories that's been told to me is that at the time of the 2008 raid, so it would have been 2 years after those marriages, that marriage particularly was performed. When they were actually doing the raid, he called some of dad's closest wives up to his office that were his daughters. So Meryl's daughters, right?
Mhm.
He called them up to his office and said, I want to know if anything happened. And
oh,
they said, yeah. So he wanted to know if there was any sexual relation. This is just a
mm-hmm.
story that was told me. Um, and they said, yes, something did happen. And he just could hardly believe it. So
Mm.
I think to some degree, it's hard to sit here and try to defend any of this. You're not gonna be in for a good time on the internet for sure. But
Mm.
and I'm not defending any of it. But I do wonder if he felt like his daughter, his his daughters would have kind of kept things from happening. But ultimately, he performed the marriage, and
I think you bring up a good point too, just so you know, as far as like defending or I think there's a big difference between I mean, it's very clear that you don't agree with what had happened, but it's
yeah,
okay for us to try to take a step and to look into Meryl Jessup's shoes and think, okay, maybe these were different circumstances than what we understand. Maybe he thought that there wasn't going to be anything sexual happening to these young daughters, that they were going to go and help with the children and be a mother and be a pain in the butt to the kids who are being naughty. And that's okay for us to accept that, hey, maybe there was something else to it, that it wasn't just all this grand plan to harm children.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't mean that we're defending what happened, but it's okay to say there might have been more sides to the story than just, because from an outsider's, like from someone who wasn't ever in the FLDS, from a pure outside perspective, especially with your father being someone who already had all of these wives, when we see someone like a 12-year-old child getting married, the only thing that makes sense in our minds is sexual deviancy, right? That there was some kind of sexual perversion of trying to attack a child. So I think it's okay to take a step and say, maybe that father, hopefully, I hope in my heart, obviously we'll never
Yeah.
know unless we ask it, and now he's dead. So there's no way asking him or getting him on here to find out. But I would hope that there was some part of him in his mind that thought that his daughters weren't going to be sexually harmed in order
Yeah.
for him to perform a marriage like that.
Knowing him personally, I mean, I know him personally, and a lot of other people in the community know him personally. And I think most people would describe him as a man of character. I still wonder why, because even to this day, when I see a girl that's 12 years old, this immediately comes to mind. And so I don't really know what to think about it all. I know that dad did have control, but he was the bishop when he did it. He was basically,
Mhm.
he was also dad's first or second counsel, first or second counselor. I can't remember, the first presidency. Right. So,
Mm.
um, I do wonder sometimes if he could have said something and, just, and dad would have respected it. I don't know. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
he did seem like a man of
Yeah.
character. And I don't, like, in my house, I don't have any pictures of dad, or, on my phone, I don't carry any pictures of dad at all. I gave all my big pictures that we used to hang on the wall, and, with dad smiling in
Yeah.
his nice suit and whatnot. I gave them all, I pitched them all, but I still have a picture of my grandpa in my house. And I don't know why. I do. I just think he was a man of some degree of character, and everybody, including my mother and so many other people, have a lot of good things to say about him. And from my experience, he was quite non-sexual type of a person. So, I mean, he didn't. He certainly didn't appear to be seeking sex himself in any inappropriate ways. He was just a pretty satisfied guy, I think. But he still performed the marriage. So what do you make of it?
I have to wonder if there's something to do with, he's one of the right, he's like the right hand man of Warren Jeffs. He's right up there in the top. I have to wonder if some of it was just to stay in good graces with Warren Jeffs, to allow something like that to happen. Like, it's the only thing that makes sense to me. I cannot imagine that he would have gone and introduced his daughter as, hey, have my daughter as your wife. I can't imagine he was the one that initiated it, based on what I've heard about him as well. So I'm with you there, but if it was asked of him, and you really believe that everything Warren was doing was coming from God, then he would have probably had a hard time saying no,
Yeah.
Yeah,
unfortunately.
and that very much probably was the case. He probably believed it was coming from God. I want to tell you one other little story about this
Yeah.
same girl. So my caretaker, it wasn't my mother, it was my caretaker, at the time. So I was 7, 8 years old. She was the teacher. So we would go to school, and our caretaker would teach school. So we would separate, and then after school, we'd come back together, and she was our caretaker. The teacher was over us while we were in school. Um, so she was the teacher to this girl, right? Yeah. And she would tell us, and I remember this. She would tell us, I know that girl is going to marry your father.
Hmm.
And to me, I mean, looking back, this is crazy, but no, this really happened. She would tell us this, and the girls are, they're 12 years old. So
Sheesh.
somehow she could just see it, and she acted totally like, sometime they're going to be part of our family, and I was like, oh, all right. And one of them, so there was two girls she told us about. They were both sisters. They're both Merrill's daughters. One of them got married to dad, and one of them didn't. She never got married.
Wow.
Yeah,
Now,
so that just tells me that there was some type of grooming
grooming.
going on beforehand.
As you were talking about going to school and stuff in Texas, and how long did you end up staying in Texas, and were you there for the raids?
Yeah, I was in Texas. So the raid, we got there in 2004, I think, and the raid happened in 2008. So basically, 4 years had gone by, and that's when these underage marriages happened. That's when dad got arrested. That's when all this other stuff was sort of going on. And I would also describe it as a super intense time. Even me as a 6, 7 year old boy, I understood that this was a super intense time, and the men were always pushing to meet deadlines. And I remember being terrified of, the destructions. Dad was always talking about them, and it was a super intense time for everybody. More intense
Dang.
than any other time, I think, in the FLDS by far. Just those couple years were so intense.
What were your thoughts
Yeah.
as a young boy when your father was caught? Because Sam talks about the fact that when Warren Jeffs was caught, he didn't believe as a young kid that like Warren Jeffs could be caught.
I didn't
Or
believe, yeah,
I
I
guess you
didn't,
weren't super young, but
yeah,
like,
well, yeah, I would have been what, when he was caught, what, 16?
yeah,
Yeah,
16.
16 years old when your father was caught in Las Vegas and taken to prison for the first time. But yeah, I didn't think he ever would because I assumed that God would protect him. And then when he did get caught, I assumed that he would be released right away because God would break down the prison walls. And I also didn't believe anything people were saying about him because I was assuming that it was all fabricated and was false information to tear down God's one true church. Those were my thoughts.
Yeah. So all that being said, what were your thoughts as his son when you heard that he got caught and was actually arrested?
Yeah, I remember we were working in the garden, and we were all told to come gather to the house. This was on August 29th, so it was a day after. It was the next day. Dad had got arrested on August 28th, the night before. And we all got to the house, and Uncle Isaac came, and Uncle Merrill, I think, came, and they said, your father's been incarcerated, and we all need to pray and be humble and be fervent. And I remember all the time before that, knowing, we need to pray. It was constantly, we need to pray for Father. We need to pray for Father. And so every prayer, every single prayer, we would have hourly prayers. When you're one of the children, you have hourly prayers with the mothers, right?
Hmm.
Hourly?
Yeah, yeah, you have
Oh
hourly.
my word.
Yeah, y'all kneel down, and you kneel down like you're actually serious, and it's just a bunch of mothers and children. You all hold hands, and if you get older, then you don't hold hands. But I guess when you get older, if you're a boy, you stop having hourly prayer when you get priested. But otherwise, you hold hands, and everybody bows their head, and somebody says the prayer. And when the clock hits 10 o'clock, you do it. When it hits 11, you do it. Then at noon, you have lunch prayer. But then at one, y'all kneel down. It doesn't matter if you're in the laundry room doing, dirty laundry, or out digging cactus, or doing rocks. It doesn't matter what you're doing. This is just how it was in Texas. Um, yeah,
Wow.
from almost the time I can remember being there. Yeah, it wasn't right at the start. It was maybe a year or two into it. I was telling you, we all came into the living room, and they told us right there in Dad's house, but we left, and I remember my caretaker, who was Mother Kate. She walked down. We walked down past the garden, and so she was so somber, and it made me somber too. And we walked around the
Mm.
we walked around the block, and it took probably, uh, from what I remember, maybe I'm wrong, but 2 hours or something. And she didn't say anything. I didn't really say anything. And then from there, it was just kind of a reality that, we were praying for Dad to get out of prison. And unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to look at it, then, we never stopped praying and didn't know we were ever going to, didn't know he was going to be in there forever. So,
Well, and the interesting thing, and maybe you can speak on this a little bit, is that if I talk to someone from the FLDS today that still believes in and follows Warren Jeffs and all the stuff, they're still praying and they still believe that that God will release him and that will break down the prison walls and set him free. And they're still praying for that.
yeah. Well, they should pray harder. because this is one of my problems when I was in the process of leaving the FLDS is I did everything I could. I did everything that was possibly in my power to bring about the events that we as a people were trying to strive for. And I got to the point where I remember telling my brother, if we can't do something more about getting Dad out of prison, then he has to stay in because we have prayed long enough. And now, if we want to take this into our own hands, we can, or I'm going to go find something else to do because this it just isn't working for me. But yeah, people in the FLDS still, they're still believing, they're still praying. And, in some sense it's kind of sad to watch, and in another sense it's kind of funny. And uh, you know
It's tricky because I still, and I assume you do as well, still have loved ones in it that you're just wishing that they would wake up, right? That's kind of the thought I have. But then I have to take a step back and say, okay, I understand. I've been in their shoes. It's very, very tricky to come to terms with. Maybe this isn't the truth, but every individual person has to do it on their own time. So it's a little tricky to I don't know. Like you want what's best for them to still believe in it,
Mhm.
but at the same time, you wish you could drive out there and throw them in the back of your truck and say, "We're out of here." Right? It's just
yeah,
it's a tough line to try to decide the best way to handle anything with the way things are right now.
yeah, it is tough because one of the things I would say about any of the people that are super loyal and that are really having a hard time is most of them have to get somewhere close to where they're considering suicide before they're gonna decide to leave. And
Wow.
I it I mean it's sad, but it's also just true. And I think a lot of people have already been through that dark stage. And I've been there, and so to me it's still the best thing that it's better to face the truth no matter what comes than it is to continue lying to yourself. So,
Yeah.
It's a good way to put that. It's a good way to put that. So
So, oh, go ahead.
I think you're going the same place I am. Go ahead.
So you're talking about how, those hard times of your father getting arrested, that those were like really intense times, right? And then the raid happens. Can you just share a little bit of what it was like as a child going through the raid?
well, it was intense, especially before Dad got put in prison. I mean,
Okay.
something about him made it so intense. And I describe to people that my view of Dad is a little bit different than most other people's, where a lot of people look at Dad and they think he was after sex, he was after money, he was after power, he was just trying to, control everybody. And obviously he was doing that. But in my view, he was in a vision. I think of it kind of like doing LSD, or, I've never done that, but have you ever heard of people like journeying,
Yeah,
and
going on trips.
yeah, and they go into this crazy experience, and then they get through it, and whatever happens, happens, and then they come out of it. Right. Well,
Mm,
the way I kind of think of Dad is he went into that and never came out of it. And I don't think he did,
Mm.
he didn't do any, I'm not saying he did any drugs or any of this stuff. I don't believe he did. But I think through his process of becoming the prophet and everything, he became so entrenched in his vision and so loyal to it. and believed so much in it himself that this was kind of the place his mind was at all through this time. And this is one of the reasons it was so intense when he was right there. Yeah, so times definitely got less intense after Dad went to prison. Even the year
Mm.
before the raid was, all the men were still working and they were still trying to make deadlines and everything, but it was just less intense. Um, it was still really strict for all the children, obviously, but when the raid happened, it was just everything, all the religious intensity left. Everybody's focus was trying to get the children back and trying to get through this difficult time. And for me, it was just a big break, honestly. It was
Wow.
it was just a big so from when I was 3 or younger, then I every hour you spend busy, you're either folding laundry or you're pulling weeds in the garden, or sometimes you'll sit down and listen to a story, but it's about one of the prophets,
Mm.
and you're back to helping with one of the meals. You're constantly working. There is zero time, especially with 80 moms. There's zero time.
Exactly.
So the raid was just people. It was the craziest thing. People all of a sudden stopped telling me what to do. Like nobody
Mm.
told me what to do. It's the weirdest thing, And so I went from constantly, folding laundry, working in the garden, doing chores, whatever it was, sitting in training, immediately getting up after training and going and doing more chores, going to bed, getting
Mm.
up right on time. I went to that to nobody telling me what to do at all, and I took it good.
So did you take it well right away, or were you afraid as a younger boy having to deal with all of this, the separation and everything, and then later on realizing, oh, you know what, this isn't as bad as I thought it was going to be? Were you afraid, or were you happy with it right away?
So initially, when the police officers showed up to the land, I was so excited because it's something different. Everybody was. There's not a single person every person was going around. All the women were sewing for the storehouse. They're making meals. They're constantly doing all these things. All the children are, doing the very same thing with the women. All the men are just striving like crazy to meet these deadlines. There wasn't a single
Mm.
person that wasn't like, okay, we get a little break. Now, after it
Wow.
got in, I mean, this is my opinion. Nobody said it, obviously, but
Hmm.
I mean, there's a few mothers, and I can already see them just pictured in my mind, you know, fervently praying. But for the most part, everybody. um, but yeah, so as it got more and more serious, then I think that all went away. It was like, okay, this is serious. This isn't just a break. We're trying to survive now, and yeah, this is all real.
A little
That
bit of
okay,
both.
that's so yeah, a little bit of both. That's just so interesting because everybody has such a unique perspective. And this is one of the first times I heard this. And I can relate to you, by the way. Every time, even though I was constantly afraid of the great destructions or the end of the world that we were always told was going to come, I was constantly afraid of all of these things. But when something exciting or intense, whether it was good or bad for the community, happened, it was like, oh my gosh, there's something exciting happening in our life for once. It's not just doom and gloom. There's actually a change in pace, which I can relate to what you're saying here. But it's the first time I've heard someone that was involved in the raid ever say it like that.
That's
So
willing to admit it, you
that's
mean?
willing to admit it, maybe. Yeah. So that's very, very interesting. I'm glad you pointed that out.
Yeah, you know exactly how it is. It's doom and it's gloom and it's work and it's chores and some. This happened several times before, where Gentiles, or we call them Gentiles, normal people, whatever you want to call them. They have to come on the land. They're coming to check out the sewer system or measure the temple so they can start taxing it or whatever they're doing. Measure one of the new houses, and everybody has to go in the house, and you bring all the shoes in, and so nothing looks suspicious. And so these were always exciting times for me. The sheriff, we would be trying to peek out the blinds and see the sheriff drive by. It was just something so different and so scary. And Yeah, it's exciting.
All the
Yeah.
things, man.
Interesting. Something you've mentioned this a little bit about your dad and like how intense things were before he went to prison. And I was curious about this because he was known, and maybe you disagree with me, and I am totally open to you disagreeing with me, by the way. But my perception of your father is that he loved to use intimidation tactics and tried to intimidate people into obedience. And a lot of people were afraid of him that, if I just take the tiniest step out of line, my whole world could be completely broken apart. And I think that he was really good at this based on what I experienced. Did you experience those intimidating moments with your father, or was he more of a easygoing person around you?
I definitely did have times I let loose a little bit. I remember going up. I was trying to talk one of the caretakers and one of the mothers into giving letting us have popcorn for snack, and they said no. You have to not. You can't have popcorn. Um, and so Dad was walking down the hall, and I ran out there and I said, Dad, or Father, because you don't say Dad when you're in the FLDS.
Right.
um, but I said, Father, can we have popcorn for snack? Our caretaker's saying we can't have popcorn, and he says, no, you should just have a carrot, And so it wasn't always so intense, but I remember the time he was interviewing me for my baptism. That was really intense. And
Hmm.
later on, when he interviewed me to get the priesthood and things like that, that was pretty intense. But I always, I never felt intimidated. I wouldn't say. I always felt it was a privilege. As far as people saying that Dad was super intimidating to them, I feel like the people that were closer to Dad, there probably was a degree of, and there's always a degree of fear in religion, right? But
Hmm.
those people that were closest to him also were, people that really believed in him oftentimes, and they really felt strongly with him about the redemption of Zion and everything else he was doing. A lot of these people would go to Dad, and I've heard constant stories from the mothers and testimony meeting where they go to Dad and they're praying really hard, and they say something to him and it makes him really happy because they're being fervent. And so this idea, I think when people come out, they'd like to look back and say, I was just I was just scared and it was all fear. And I do think a big part of the reason they were doing what they were doing was fear of damnation and whatnot. But I don't think that I think it would be a lie to say that they weren't involved in this vision and this, you know, mission to redeem Zion, because often I've heard so many people's stories about how they went to Dad and said something to him, and then, he gave them further instruction. So I,
Right.
once you're out of it, you'd like to look at it and say it's all fear. But when you're in it,
Hmm.
if you're being honest, for me, I certainly had times as I got older, especially where I was totally sure. Was I doing some things for fear? Did I initially start them because I was scared that I was going to be damned or whatever? Yeah, I probably did. But was I also super spiritually involved and, devoted to this cause? Absolutely.
Yeah. No,
Yeah,
that makes sense for
it's a good
sure. Yep.
perspective. One thing we've heard a lot, like after the raids and after your father was in prison for a while, was how tough it was on his immediate family
Mm.
with like moving around and the kind of control he was trying to still exert over your family. Can you give us a little insight of your experience with that? That like once he was in prison, what was it like being a part of his immediate family
Mm.
while he was in prison?
Yeah. So he already had houses of hiding, and people were going and coming from him that weren't worthy to be there at R17. Um, but for me, life didn't change until the raid, certainly. I think some people probably went and go. I remember a lot of messages Dad would call and tell his wives, essentially telling them there's other men and I'm in prison. don't do something stupid. That's the yeah, that's the message I remember. So
Keep all of his
Interesting.
wives loyal.
yeah, that I mean that's and if he had questions or um, got a report from some of his other wives or whoever that one of his wives was talking to this guy or something so very fast, that guy would be sent away, and the whoever
Oh,
the girl or the mother was would be taken to a house of hiding. Or and I think I saw this several times, where one of the mothers starts talking to one of the men, and for some reason it goes a little bit farther where they're doing a few more favors. There's, if you were to watch it, you would think there is absolutely nothing there.
mm,
But
Mm.
with how strict everything was, then something was there. Right. So, yeah,
mm.
then you would see one of the other mothers report it, and both people would get sent away. So,
Interesting. Wow.
Dang.
Yeah, that would be terrifying to always be in fear of, maybe not always fear, but this
right.
idea that if you do something against or that could go against the church or go against your father, that you could so easily be sent away. And we've had some people on that have been sent to those houses of hiding, and they were basically, I mean, for
Isolated.
lack of a better term, trapped to remain in this place, and really they weren't supposed to leave.
Yeah, even I've been in the houses of hiding a fair amount. But one of the things I was going to say is it's just astounding the dishonesty that we had with ourselves about our own feelings. So that relationship I was telling you about, where one of the mothers would start getting close to one of the men, or one of the boys would start getting close to one of the mothers, in their mind, they were never thinking any immorality or impure thoughts, but they were obviously having a crush. You couldn't,
Mm,
neither person admits it in their own mind, but those are obviously the feelings they're having. So, and
right.
they're never gonna let those thoughts come into their mind because they're doing, at least not for a long time. So there's just a serious amount of dishonesty. But as time went on, then yeah, we went. So after the raid, then we went to the houses of hiding, originally for protection reasons, but Dad was worried about another raid or whatever was going to happen. So we were in the houses of hiding over in Colorado, and we moved a lot during that time. We would, they would rent a house, and I think a lot of crickers feel like they were forking out a lot of tithing so that we could live in high-end houses in, in Colorado. But hey, that's not my fault. You were paying your tithing, not me. um,
Yeah.
so yeah, we did have some really nice houses in Colorado, and sometimes they were fun. They were always a little bit full. They were stashed full of women and children, and usually had a caretaker, some man living there with his little family, taking care of everybody. And so yeah, we spend a lot of time in these houses of hiding after the raid.
So looking back now, knowing what you know now, do you find it surprising that the prison allowed so much communication from your father to the outside, considering what he was put in prison for and convicted of? Does it seem surprising to you that he was allowed to communicate with the church and his family so much?
No, I think there was months. We would sometimes go 3 months without hearing anything from him. If if
Oh.
Mm,
if they won't let you talk, you can sue. They can't legally stop you from talking from someone in prison, as far as I
mm,
understand, unless something really bad is happening. Then they can probably win in court. But as far as I understand, if you can't talk to someone, your family member in prison, you can sue and talk to them, as far as I understand. And if not, then you always absolutely can have an attorney go in there. And a lot of messages did go to Dad through his attorneys. The most important ones went to Dad through his attorneys.
mm.
And
Interesting.
another thing, I guess we should talk about this for a sec, because I think a lot of people don't know that Dad ended up winning all his cases in Utah and Arizona.
Right.
And right. And I think was pretty commonly agreed on by attorneys that he could win in Texas because of how the evidence was seized. But ultimately, it was ultimately his fault that he's in prison for life. You can debate whether that was. I'm not saying he shouldn't be. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that with good attorneys, he probably would have got off if he had just let them do their thing. He just didn't let them do their thing. And there's an argument to be made that he understood kind of his situation and decided to just be in prison for the rest of his life. I don't think that's the right argument. I think he genuinely was still in this vision and believed that he was doing what God wanted. And dismissed his attorneys because that's what God told him to do. I think that's what really happened. But yeah, there's been long times without communication, but ultimately he's probably always going to be able to communicate to some degree.
Yeah. There's been a lot of people that have come across as almost angry that the prison has allowed him to communicate, because the outside world just sees what's going on within the FLDS church and hear of some of these revelations that are coming from Warren from prison and these things. And they say, how are they allowing him to say these things and to do these things? But I think maybe he's trying to be very careful with the way that he does communicate so that it doesn't seem like it will be very damaging towards anybody or their religion or anything like that. But then ultimately the followers are able to decipher what he's actually meaning. What do you think? Or do you think that people are reading through these revelations before they allow them to leave the prison walls?
He's been given these revelations for a long time. I'm sure that before he sends letters, I'm sure they make a copy of it. And perhaps sometimes they don't let him get the letters or send the letters. Maybe there's letters they've said, you know what, we're just going to lose this one, right? And you never get it. But he can make a phone call but the late revelations, I mean, they're disgusting. They're horrible. Yeah. They're, you wouldn't even want to hear them. They're that bad.
Without getting into like graphic detail, when you say that these revelations were disgusting, I know everyone's wondering the same thing me because I'm a super nosy person. Are we talking like sexually disgusting? Are we talking about the way he's treating people disgusting? Could you give just a little more detail so I'm not like dying to know what was in them? To be continued. Please join us next Saturday, March 1st, as we learn the disturbing details of these recent revelations and hear how Jaden finds freedom from his past.